All right, verse 8. Verse 8, but we always will ask for questions first, of course, if anybody's got anything. Joe and Judy, by the way, are at the doctor's office. It's just a checkup, but the doctor's running behind, so they don't think they'll get out in time. Yeah, and I don't know where Carolyn and Tony are, but oh well. So anyway, questions, comments, anybody? Questions? Got something you want to yak about? Anybody? Nobody? Somebody? It is good to hear the jets. Yes, it is. It's very nice. Yes, the sound of freedom, as they say. Yeah. All right, so we were at verse 8, okay? And we're on page 8 also of the notes, and down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, number 4 bullet point. Okay. Next thing, Paul seeks for them to receive ongoing grace and peace from God, and peace. Well, I guess I repeated that. This is a common greeting in most of his letters. Grace and peace. Grace and peace. Okay. Grace, of course, meaning the grace of God, the mercy of God, the fact that God forgives us for the sake of Jesus and his work. And then that, of course, then leads to peace. That's why the two of them go together so well. Just as peace and blessings go together well. You can't have blessings from God if you're not at peace with God. If he's not at peace with you, he's not going to give you blessings. It's pretty simple. Okay. Same thing here. If you don't have grace first, then you're not going to be at peace. And if you don't have peace, you're obviously not going to get grace. And so in Paul's letters, this is a very common type of greeting where he's expressing both a thanks and also a hope, let's say, or a prayer for continuing this merciful relationship between the people and God that will, of course, give them eternal peace. That's the bottom line, you might say. Next point, Paul expresses gratitude for the saints in Rome and for the fact their faith is recognized and mentioned throughout the whole known world. And of course it would be because people traveling to and from Rome quite a bit. Since Rome was the capital city of the empire, this gave the church there a special opportunity to make known the gospel. Not only do you have merchants, of course, and politicians coming from all parts of the world to Rome, to either see the emperor or attend the Senate for some reason or attend to some other kind of business. You've also got the military. And from Rome goes out the orders for the various military. And of course, you have a lot of groups and legions and such being transferred from place to place. And you have people that are going from people, new soldiers, let's say, coming, new officers, being assigned from Rome, and they have the possibility of running into Christians, of course, or hearing about Christianity, and then taking that information with them as they go to the far-flung reaches of the empire. An active, zealous church in Rome would be much more likely to become known through the empire than would a church in some other city. So it is true, of course, that big cities, cities that were pretty well known in the empire, like Ephesus and Thessalonica, those cities would also become known. Not so much maybe Colossae or Philippi, but certainly those cities would be known. Corinth also, as a merchant city and a kind of a trading post kind of place, would also be well known. Paul was glad that their faith was such that people throughout the empire could see their faith in action. And of course, this is an important part of outreach. Even if we are not, let's say, well-spoken in the Bible, that is, we can't necessarily preach like Paul or Peter or anything like that, but our Christian living, our Christian lives preach sermons every day. And so when you've got a church like the church in Rome that Paul says he knows the people are expressing their faith in works of kindness and love and generosity and so on and so forth. These are the things that are attracting attention to the Christian church, and one of the things that helped the Christian church to grow so fast throughout the empire. Questions on those verses? All right, let us proceed then. Verses 9 and 10. He goes on, "For God, whom I serve in my spirit in the preaching of the gospel of his Son, is my witness as to how unceasingly I make mention of you." So in Paul's travels, one of the things he's doing is talking about his congregations, and he talks about them quite a bit. "Always in my prayers making request, if perhaps now at last by the will of God I may succeed in coming to you." So this is a church that owes its existence to the early people coming after Pentecost, but also to Paul and his support of them, that is, talking about them. But he himself has not yet been able to be there. So this isn't a church, you would say, founded by Paul. For that matter, it wasn't founded by Peter either. Of course, we know that the Romans claim that Peter founded the church in Rome and was the first bishop and all that, but there's no historical evidence of that whatsoever. None. Zero. Nada. Okay?
And that's why they tried to find it. You say there's nothing against it.
Well, there's nothing for it, that's for sure. Except for one thing, even though history does not necessarily corroborate it, it was a thought, or it was thought of as a fact very early in the church that Peter died there, that Peter was killed at Rome or nearby Rome. So that's the only connection really that we know that Peter has to Rome, is that he died there. Now, we're not really even sure of that. There's no original eyewitness account or anything like that. A church historian 100 years after Peter is the one who mentions it. And he says, we know or we believe that Peter was crucified in Rome, and that Peter requested to be crucified upside down because he did not believe he was worthy to die in the same exact manner as Christ did. But already 100 years after Peter, this was already a legend. This was not written down historic fact, but a legend. That is a thought, a supposed fact passed down from generation to generation for many, many, many years. In history, I think it's fair to say that a lot of these kinds of things, these legends, have a basis in truth. And so it really doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not dead set against Peter being in Rome at all. I frankly think he did make it to Rome and probably did die there. But again, that doesn't mean that he was Bishop of Rome or that he founded the Church of Rome or anything like that. So you can take some things in, but not others. So Paul wants to come to Rome. Let's look at the notes then. Under chapter 1, 9 and 10, Paul frequently began his epistles by assuring the Christians to whom he writes that they are regularly remembered in his prayers to the Lord. And this, of course, brings up something interesting. Would God not have cared for or about the Roman church had Paul not prayed about it? Well, of course he would have. It's like Luther's explanation, and I think Luther's explanation of the Lord's Prayer is so good in this regard. But Luther begins almost every explanation with the same thought. The kingdom of God, he says, for example, when you're talking about that, thy kingdom come. Luther writes, the kingdom of God comes without our doing anyway. Okay? And he says that in other explanations too. God provides us our daily bread whether we pray for it or not. Okay? God's will is done whether we ask for it to be done or not. All of those things are true, and I think it's very appropriate and it's important that Luther make that comment because sometimes I think we get feeling a little bit perhaps presumptuous, perhaps. Well, if I don't pray for it, it won't get done. That's not necessarily true at all. It might be, but not necessarily. God will do what God will do. And so it is important to these people and is important to Paul to let them know, I'm praying for you. But it's not in the sense of, if I don't pray for you, you're going to suffer terrible reverses or whatever. That's not the point. The point is, I'm thinking about you, I'm praying for you. This is effective. We know this. The scriptures teach us that prayer is effective, that prayer makes a difference. God tells us this. The prayer of a righteous man availeth much, we're told, okay? So that is true. Again, folks, this contradiction is not going to be fixed in our heads, okay? We're never going to be able to adjust or to come to a logical explanation as to how our prayers affect the will of God. The will of God that you might say is set in eternity. What the people are going to be saved are those who are going to be saved. The things that are going to happen are the things that are going to happen. Okay, that's true. The will of God cannot be, let's say, adjusted. All right. At the same time, God makes it very clear that it is. Now, this is a contradiction, of course. This bothers us if we stop and think about it too much. And yet, like so many other things in Scripture, we have to accept the fact that there are two truths that are contrary to one another, but they are just that, truths. They stand on by themselves alone as truths. And the Scriptures are very clear about those things. All right? So I always tell people, don't let it drive you crazy. Okay? On the one hand, take from each what you need. We need to take from the will of God is always done, is always accomplished. We need to take from that comfort in that God is going to do whatever is necessary in order to save us and get us to heaven. So we should take comfort from that. At the same time, we should also take comfort from the Scriptures that teach us that prayer can change God's mind, so to speak, okay? And get God to do things that we ask for. As Jesus said, ask and you will be given, knock and it should be open to you, and so on and so forth. And so when we need the one or the other of those truths, we should look to them. And we should hang on to those things. When we are in need of something different in our lives, we should certainly pray for that. And we should pray believing that it will happen. At the same time, when we're going through difficulties and hard things are happening to us, we should remember that all things work out to good for them that love God, that are called according to His purpose, so that we would inherit eternal life. And so it just kind of depends on our circumstances which one we're going to emphasize. Okay? We may emphasize the fact that God listens to prayers, or we may emphasize the fact that whatever happens is the will of God. Okay? And it just depends on what's going on in our lives. And I think, frankly, that's a better way to go than if everything was all nice and logical. If everything was logical, then God's will would be affected only by us and our prayers, and it would or would not get done depending on whether we cared enough to talk about it or not. And I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think anybody wants to be responsible for their own salvation. I don't think anybody wants to be responsible for what's going on in the world. Well, gee, I didn't pray enough for San Diego, and so an earthquake happened and wiped out the town. You want to take responsibility for that? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. I don't think that's a very good idea. Oh, I didn't pray enough for my mother or my father or my son or my daughter, and so they died early, or they didn't come to faith or whatever. It's all my fault because I didn't do it. Nobody wants that, okay? That's foolish. That's silly. At the same time, we don't want to just poo-poo the encouragement, as Paul says elsewhere, pray unceasingly, pray constantly. Okay? It's not going to do any good. My wife is sick, or my husband is sick, or my kids are sick, or whether it's not going to do any good to pray, because God's going to do what God's going to do, and so I'm not going to pray about it. Well, that's not right either. Okay? Who wants to be just a fatalist and just say, okay, well, so and so's going to die. That's the way it is. Okay, that's the way. Okay, fine. Never mind. We're just little machines, and God just moves us around like chess pieces on a board. You want that? That's not very comforting, is it? No, it's not. So, if the biblical religion was nice and logical, okay, it was nice and it made perfect sense, it wouldn't be very comforting. It wouldn't be much of a religion, frankly, at all. Somebody reminded me the other day that Muslims, one of the Muslims' common prayers to Allah is that the struggle and strife and disagreements among Christians would never be solved. One of the prayers that the Muslims pray in their Arabic prayers is that the Christian church continue to be at war with itself. They pray that on purpose. Okay? And to them that's logical. That makes sense. All right. And so when they look and they see that the church is divided and remains divided and always will be divided, they say, "Oh, look, we're affecting the times. We're affecting the Christians." Well, there's a lot of reasons why the church is divided. Well, the main reason being false doctrine, of course. But that has nothing to do with whether the prayers of the Muslims are effective or whether there is truly a Allah out there doing things or not. Of course, there's not. We know that. So having a logical religion, or having a religion that is quid pro quo, let's say, you do this and you get that, so and so forth. That's not much of a religion, frankly. That's really not very comforting.
That brings along the once saved, always saved.
Well, that too, yeah, exactly. So, Paul is important, makes an important point that he's praying for them. Next point, an added reason for this is quite likely there are many who have been some at Rome who doubted or even impugned Paul's sincerity and authority. So, as was common in the early church, who's going to run the show? Who's going to run the show? And there were people we know who opposed Paul. Some opposed Paul because he had persecuted the church and killed Christians and so on and so forth, and didn't think he belonged to be in a head position. Right? There are some who opposed Paul because he was a Pharisee, or had been a Pharisee. There are some who opposed Paul because he was half Roman, right? And so they didn't trust him. There are some who opposed Paul because one of his parents were Gentiles. His father was a Gentile, was a Roman. And so they didn't like that. They thought that was bad. On the other hand, there were people who didn't like Paul because they thought he was too Jewish. Okay? So there were people we know in the early church who would attack Paul in his absence and say, don't listen to this guy. He doesn't care about you. So it's important for Paul to say, hey, I'm praying for you. Come on. I think good thoughts about you, and I send good thoughts to God about you all the time. All right. This was especially true among the Judaizers who opposed Paul's teaching about the Old Testament law. These were the Jews who said Paul was too Gentile. Okay? That Paul was not upholding the laws of Moses the way he should. And then he adds that he serves God from a spirit of harmony in the gospel. And so he wants to remind them that his motivation is gospel motivation. He's not in it for the money. He's not in it for the power. He's not in it for the influence. He's not in it to become powerful, rich, whatever. He's in it because of the gospel. That's why he's doing what he's doing. Paul also specifically requests in his prayers that some means might be found so that he could visit the Roman congregation. Remember that Paul is working his way across the Mediterranean. He is not living off the offerings of the churches. He is working, either as a tent maker or a sail maker, one of the two. That was his craft that he knew. Okay, and so Paul is having to stay places for a while, earn money so that he can then travel. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't take any offerings at all. He might have taken some, or certainly he might have accepted some offerings for his traveling companions, people like Timothy, and so on and so forth, to help support them. That is possible. But in the main, Paul was kind of restricted a little bit in his movements because he had to make his own way. He determined to do that because he didn't want anybody saying that he was in it for the money. Now, and he made a big point about saying, no, I determined to do this. That doesn't mean that everybody has to be this way. It's just the way I decided that I'm going to work. Okay, that I'm going to do these things. All right. Somebody like Timothy or Titus or Epaphroditus or some of these other guys, they should be paid for their work as ministers of the gospel, but not me. I've decided I want to work my way through the mission work. He tells them that he had intended to come for some time to visit them personally, but his plans have been thwarted by other circumstances. It may be that some in Rome had implied that the reason Paul had not come to visit them yet was he did not care for them, or was afraid to face the Judaizers or Roman persecution. Paul indeed wanted to visit them, yet he also knew his comings and goings must fulfill the will of God. You and I would say, well, gee, here this church is so important, and in the future, of course, it's going to be even more important. Wouldn't it be God's will that Paul would get there not just, once, but would get there early many times and come back many times? And wouldn't it make sense for Paul to stay there and live in Rome and kind of shepherd that congregation more so than anyone else, because it's going to be so important in the future? That's the way we would think. But obviously that was not what God wanted to do. Page 9. Carrying on with this thought then, sometimes we as humans make plans that do not work out. It may be that God has other plans for us, or that circumstances hinder us, and God does not always see fit to overcome those circumstances. So we could plan, to go someplace, take a vacation somewhere, or make a business trip somewhere, or, whatever. Go visit somebody that we know, and that falls through, doesn't come about. And, that's why it's a good thing always to kind of add to our thoughts, God willing. If God so determines it, this will happen. Okay? God had on occasion directed Paul to go preach in some other place than where Paul wanted to go. Paul wanted to stay in Asia Minor. He wanted to go back to the churches of Galatia and preach there. He wanted to go up into the Black Sea region and preach there. And instead, God gave him the vision of the Macedonian and said, no, come over here. We need you over here. You come over here and preach. And so, he went over to Greece. From Turkey, he went over to Greece. And, it was a troubling trip, and it was a tough deal. And, he didn't always have an easy time of it over in Greece. We can make all kinds of plans, and we can think, we know best. But God does. We must always remember God in our plans and always pray that His will be accomplished, whether it is what we want or not. Right now, of course, we've got tension in the world, especially in Eastern Europe, and I have to laugh a little bit at people in the business world or whatever, saying, we're concerned about COVID still, or we're concerned about mergers and acquisitions, or we're concerned about this, or we're concerned about that. I think if they were paying attention, well, we were concerned about inflation, one guy said on the news the other day. Well, okay, that's fine, but if Putin decides to invade the Russian portion of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians get a crick in their neck over it and get all upset about it, and ask NATO to intervene, we could have a real big, huge mess on our hands. And it does not necessarily mean that somebody won't push a big red button. And nobody's talking about that. I think it's amazing that I have not heard one single solitary person, not one, not in the military, not in the politics, not in Congress, not even among the news people, not heard one person say, hey, the NATO people and the Russian people, we both have these things called ICBMs, hello? With big nuclear war tips on them. Nobody has said that. It's as though everybody simply assumes that the Russians will be satisfied with invading and being opposed by tanks and machine guns and whatever else, and not resort to saying, hey, we're taking a licking, and so we're going to wipe out the other side with nukes. Not a person has said that. Or the other side. I mean, if we are so weak as many think we are, and you look at Afghanistan, all right, what happens when one of the commanders from the Ukraine area calls up the White House and says, we're getting our tails kicked. The Russian tanks are just rolling over us like molasses in January, or whatever. It's just we're getting the heck beat out of us, and they might just keep right on going into Germany and France and the whole 9 yards. Who's to say that Grandpa Joe, won't get excited, and push the button himself? Nobody's saying that. But I think they should. I think somebody ought to bring up the fact, hey guys, this isn't exactly like Kazakhstan and Rejectistan fighting each other. Okay, this isn't like Costa Rica going to war against Guatemala. Okay, this is not what's happening. You've got two huge superpowers with thousands of nuclear warheads on each side. They're the ones who are pointing guns at each other. I would think by now somebody would have mentioned, hello, we have another consideration here to take into account. But as I say, not a single person, not a news article. I've read 5 papers just the other day, and when you've got 100,000 troops on one side and 15 or 20,000 troops on the other side, the likelihood of the ones getting whipped resorting to nukes, even tactical nukes, is pretty high. And I would think at least somebody would have said, "Excuse me, Joe, would you comment on this? Are you gonna make a promise not to do this, or have you asked Putin to keep it out of red button stage? Huh?" Nobody seems to care. So you know what? We can make all kinds of plans for February and March and whatever. We can decide we're going to do this Holy Week, and we're going to do this for Resurrection and whatever. Well, we may be living in caves by then, and working by candlelight, if we're even alive. So I think sometimes you take into consideration here, we don't know what God has in store. God has every right at this point to allow this to happen. Every right in the world. The way the world has thumbed their nose at God, He has every right to knock us back to the Stone Age.
I wonder why he doesn't.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yes, sir.
I sort of feel the way you do. I don't think it's ever going to go to nuclear confrontation now. Not that it won't in the future, meaning years from now. I think right now that they know the weakness of our president, And so because they're testing him on all fronts.
Mhm.
I mean, just, what was it, 3 weeks ago, there was some military maneuvers with China, Russia, and Iran.
Mhm.
What just happened over in the Middle East?
Mhm.
Some missiles hit one of our military bases. Well, we know that was Iran Institute,
Mhm. Mhm.
okay, which is part of the three now.
Mhm.
Russia's pushing on Ukraine, China's pushing in the,
Taiwan.
China Sea. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to destroy our economy, which we're doing a good enough job by ourselves. We don't need their help.
We don't need
Germany doesn't even side with NATO.
No.
Germany is not allowing Estonia to use their airspace
Yeah.
to fly military supplies to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And when the United States asked, Germany to allow flights, they said no. What I like is what somebody said, we should remove all of our military bases in Germany,
Yeah.
stop paying them,
Yeah.
and move them to Poland.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That would work. That
I
would
really
work.
don't think it's going to be
Yeah,
a nuclear
yeah.
war.
Well, the fact of the matter is, it's one of those things. It's like in the Balkans.
Right.
It's like in the Middle East or whatever. When people drew up maps, they drew up maps the way they wanted to. And the Ukraine, goodness sakes, the Ukraine is like, okay, if you leave the Rocky Mountains, okay, let's say you're driving out of Denver, you leave the Rocky Mountains, you see the exact same landscape after you get out of Denver. You see the exact same landscape until you get to the Great Lakes. Now, I don't know, that's 1,000 miles or more, okay? And when you leave Dallas and you're driving north, you see the exact same landscape until you get to the forests of Saskatchewan. That's the Ukraine. There are a few. I mean, well, at least I guess in the Middle West, you got the Mississippi River and the Missouri River. Okay, and the Red River. You got a few places where you can at least make a border. You don't got that in the Ukraine. There ain't no place to make a border. And so when they went to draw the lines, after the war, they just drew the lines wherever they drew the lines, and it didn't matter to Russia that Ukraine was bigger than it maybe should have been, because all the people they're all subservient to the Soviet Union anyway, right? So what difference does it make that you got a whole bunch of Russians living in the Ukraine? Didn't make any difference. And what does the Ukrainians care? They're one of the Soviet socialist republics. Okay? Well, guess what? Bingo, the Soviet socialist republics all go bye-bye, and they all become sovereign nations. And then you've got a problem, because now you've got all these Russians living in, big long area of Ukraine that were never supposed to be in Ukraine in the first place. And they don't like it, because Ukrainians are different than Russians. They're not exactly the same.
He wants more access to the sea.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. That's fun.
All he needs to do is take Kiev and put in a puppet regime, and he's got the country.
Well, sure, yeah. But I think if the Ukrainians were smart, they'd just say, let's look at history here, and this strip of land with all these Russians that live there, that speak Russian, that are ethnic Russians, that are culturally Russians, that are members of the Russian Orthodox Church, not the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. You know what? You can have it back. Go ahead, take it.
Good riddance.
Good, no big deal. Okay, no great loss.
You have a point there, because right now,
Absolutely.
the world today, the lifestyle in Ukraine is the same as in Russia. They have big box stores, they have grocery stores, they have gas stations. There's no shortage. We have less food on our shelves than Russia does.
Yeah.
So,
So
it's just, again,
it's crazy. These countries, these countries get real possessive of territory that was never theirs in the first place, and doesn't belong to them, was never theirs, and never had their people in it. And give it up, guys. Give it up. It's not going to hurt you. You're not going to be any worse off than you are now. And you put an end to a lot of turmoil and strife. But of course they refuse. They refuse, and they're asking the West, help us throw the Russians out. Well, when you get the people living there siding with the invading force, you've got a little bit of a problem. You got a little bit of a problem. Okay. Anyway, the point being of this is that, make your plans fine. You want to make plans for July, make plans for July. You want to have plans for August and September, that's fine. No problem. I'm not saying you shouldn't. All I'm saying is that when humans make plans, all right, we ought to remember we ain't in charge. We ain't calling the shots. God is. And if God wants to allow a big conflagration of some kind, he's going to allow it. So, just keep that in the back of your mind, be prepared, right? All right.
It might also be allowing you to do it just so far.
Yep. All right, next couple verses, unless there's a questions. Verses 11 and 12. For I long to see you, so that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, so that you may be established, built up, strengthened, however. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you, while among you, each of us by the other's faith, both yours and mine. Okay, so Paul also longed to visit Rome so he can impart some spiritual gift to strengthen them, and so they could be mutually comforted by one another's faith. Now, what kind of spiritual gift is Paul giving? Well, remember that Paul is been instructed by Christ, and he is a messenger of the gospel, and so he is going to be able to give them a better definition, shall we say, a better application maybe, of the gospel, right? That's what everybody needs. The church does not need more laws. The church does not need more rules, okay? That's not what the church needs. The church always needs and forever needs gospel. Needs preaching of the gospel over and over and over again, explanation of the gospel, applications of the gospel, appropriations of the gospel, and so on and so forth. Gospel motivation is what's really going to change the church, going to make the church grow or whatever, and it's a gospel proclamation that's going to strengthen the church, encourage the church, comfort the church, and give the church the ability to resist the devil and temptation in the world, and to expand according to God's will. Okay? Gospel. Yeah, gospel. And so that's what he's talking about here. Now, will that in turn cause somebody to have the gift of speaking a language without learning it? What we sometimes refer to as tongues? It might. Would Paul's teaching there encourage somebody to become a preacher like him? Certainly could. Would Paul's preaching there encourage somebody to be a missionary, take off for the hinterlands of Germany or Austria or whatever to preach the gospel? That could. That's a spiritual gift too. So we're not sure exactly what kind of spiritual gifts necessarily Paul brings with him when he goes someplace, but it could be any of those things. Paul, however, does not specify what gift he expected to give them. Clearly, he could not know what was needed till he arrived. What's Rome need more than anything else? I don't know. I think you can guess from the rest of the book that Rome, the Church of Rome, needed good doctrine, because that's what the rest of the book is. I mean, the whole rest of the book, especially the first 9-10 chapters, are really a lot of good, real doctrinal material, all 11 chapters even. And then the 12 and following are chapters on like Christian living and whatever. So that's why I say Romans is a good dogmatics textbook. It's a good summary of Christian doctrine. So I think you can say that having not been visited or begun by an apostle, as far as we know, and not been visited by any of the apostles, as far as we know, Rome was probably in need of some good biblical education. Okay. As the saints in Rome would be strengthened by Paul's presence, so he hoped they could mutually encourage one another by their common faith. Being with other faithful Christians gives strength, not just to one or to the other, but to all who can be involved. This is one reason, though they're not the main one, that God instructs us to continue meeting together as believers until the last day nears. Okay, when the last day nears, we probably won't be able to get together as easily or as often as we do. But until then, God wants us to get together to encourage one another. Again, that's not the main purpose of worship, but it is a purpose of worship, and certainly a good one and a beneficial one. Questions on that section? All right, next couple of verses. 13 to 15. I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I have planned to come to you, and have been prevented so far, of course, by God, so that I may obtain some fruit among you, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. And so, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. Now, here I say, Paul never states what circumstances hindered him from visiting Rome when he intended to. Indeed, being an inspired writer and even an apostle did not mean that an individual was directly guided by God in every personal decision he made, especially regarding where or to whom he would preach. So we don't know what happened. Was it a case of Paul not having enough money to travel to Rome? Could be. Was it a case of just no transportation available? Could be. Was it a case that there were problems where he was at Ephesus or Corinth that he had to stay and deal with those issues? Could certainly be. Maybe he wanted to go to Rome, but instead he had to go back to Jerusalem. We know that happened. That's possible, certainly. Did he maybe wind up going to North Africa or Spain even before he got to Rome? That's possible too. So there's all kinds of circumstances that might have come about that caused Paul not to be able to go to Rome. Now, we know what happens. What happens, of course, is that Paul winds up going to Rome as a prisoner. Okay, and so that God kind of takes control here and sees to it that Paul is arrested and put in chains and put on a ship. And that ship makes it, that ship doesn't, but eventually Paul, of course, makes it to Rome as a prisoner. So we know how the story ends. We know how Paul gets to Rome, but he doesn't know that, of course, right now. God can and does allow Satan to hinder the plans of believers. Please remember that. Please remember that. It doesn't mean God is dumb. It doesn't mean God is powerless. It doesn't mean he's weak. It doesn't mean he's stupid. It doesn't mean he's indecisive. Okay? It doesn't mean any of those things. God allows what he allows. And sometimes he allows Satan to do what he wants to, even when it comes to the work of sharing the gospel. Clearly, Satan does not have greater power than God. So, Satan hinders the plans of God's children, including his ministers, only, and here's the key, if, for some purpose of his own, God will still use his servants to preach in other places and accomplish his will in other ways. Real important point here. The only time Satan gets his way is when God works it to our benefit, and to his benefit first, of course, and then our benefit. That's the only way he allows Satan to get his. And that includes all the trouble that Job was caused. Okay? That includes all of the difficulties of Peter and the other apostles. That includes the martyrdom of all the apostles except for John. That includes all the trouble that Paul got into. And he lists them at various places about shipwrecked and being beaten and being stoned and all this kind of stuff. And of course being put in jail and so on and so forth. And so all of those things are included. And again, I think this is not mentioned as often as necessary among Christians. This is not given enough thought. The warm fuzzies out there, the warm fuzzy preachers, if you're a believer, you'll have nothing but prosperity. If you're a believer, you'll have nothing but pleasure. If you're a believer, you'll have nothing but blessing. If you're a believer, you have nothing but good luck. If you're a believer, you have nothing but nice things happen to you, etc., etc., etc. That's just a big fat lie. Okay, you can't say that. Now, does that happen? Sure it does. I've known Christians who seem to go through life willy-nilly. Not a darn thing happens to them. They die at 110, happy as lark. Okay, and everything they've touched has turned to prosperity, and they have, you can see them in the obituary sometimes. 10 kids and 20 grandkids and 1,300 great grandkids and blah 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 and so, and died at 110 and in his sleep. Okay, that's the way it goes for some. Nothing you can say about it. It just is what it is. And on the other hand, you read every once in a while, you see the guy dies at 27, for no particular reason at all, gets a cancer of some kind, he's gone. Okay?
People who get 2, 3, 4 pages in obituary.
Oh, yeah. Paul now gives us yet another reason why he wanted to visit him. He wanted to be able to produce some fruit. Now, when Paul talks about fruit, he's talking about converts. He's talking about souls added to Christ's kingdom, as he had in other Gentile cities. He had been an instrument of the Holy Spirit in converting Gentiles in many places already, and he wants to continue that. And this was Paul's main goal in his work. His main goal in his work is to, of course, add new people to the kingdom of God. That is, add new people to the faith, add to eternal life. That's what he's looking at, okay? I know, let's keep going, I guess, another verse or two. This is really a good dividing point for the chapter. I guess we have time. We can get going in the next section, but really starting at verse 16, up to now, this has all been kind of introduction and all been what kind of a general summary of what Paul wants to do. But now when you get into verse 16 and 17 and following, you're really getting into the theological meat, the doctrinal stake, of Romans, all right? So we have enough time. We can at least introduce this section, unless there are questions on the introductory part. I don't see any. Let us continue then. So verses 16, and I'll go ahead and read 17 too, because they kind of go together. Paul says, again, this is the doctrinal portion of the book. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it, the gospel, is the power of God for salvation. That is, it is the cause, if you will, of salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Just so happened that the gospel came to the Jews first. Jesus came to Israel first, and Jesus said, only go to the children of Israel first. And then he gives the reason. For in it, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. And that's a very important phrase and very difficult for some people to understand. As it is written, and this is how you understand it, okay? If you want to understand what from faith to faith means, you have to look at what Bible passage Paul quotes, because he says, as it is written. So this idea, from faith to faith, is defined for us by the Bible, not by our brains, not by our doctrinal theology, whatever, but first and foremost by the Bible itself. So, from faith to faith means, or is defined by, the righteous man, or the righteous person, I guess you could say, shall live. What kind of live? Eternal live. Shall exist, if you will, by faith. Faith in what? You have to have faith in something. There has to be an object of that faith. Faith in what? Well, faith in the work of Jesus. Or you could say Jesus too, but let's always remember, when we talk about Jesus, we're talking about what Jesus accomplished. We're not just talking about Jesus in the abstract. We're talking about Jesus in the concrete. All right? So, what does faith to faith mean? It means that the righteous or the just has eternal life by faith. Okay? Now, you could add here, by grace through faith, of course, the full, okay? But we know this is what Paul means, as we knew this is what Habakkuk means. You have to have grace first before you can have faith. Faith doesn't come in a vacuum. Faith comes because the means of grace have come first. Now, the means of grace can come first, and faith sometimes does not follow. That's because the means of grace can be rejected. Right? Okay. So always understand, when Paul quotes an Old Testament verse, or a verse of the gospel, or a fact of the gospels, okay, or whatever, when he's quoting that, after he makes a statement of doctrinal import of some kind, the two explain one another. Okay? So this verse now states, again, the theme of the entire letter to the Romans, namely, the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is God's power to save all whom he brings to believe it, all who do not reject it. Next page. Paul has completed his introductory thoughts, and so here states the theme of his letter. Then he uses it to introduce the section of the book that reveals all mankind's need for the gospel. So, having stated the theme, then he goes in to develop that theme. And of course, in developing that theme, he'll talk a lot in the rest of chapter 1 and part of chapter 2 in talking about sin and the original sin and widespread sin and so on and so forth. Note how important the little word is, for. This indicates the main reason Paul was preaching. In other words, he talks about this, I want to get some fruit. How am I going to get fruit? How am I going to get converts in Rome? I'm going to get converts in Rome just as the same way as I got converts in the other city. For, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. For, or it's the gospel that does it. I'm not going to limit my preaching of the gospel. I'm not going to preach the law. I'm going to preach the gospel. Now, in preaching the gospel, of course, you have to preach the law somewhat too. But his point is, my goal is to preach the gospel. That's what I'm going to do. Okay? It is the power of God. He is always ready to preach the gospel because he knew it was God's power to save the lost. You cannot be saved without the gospel. The law cannot save you. Period. The law will not make you a believer. It is impossible. All the law can do is show you your sin and show you a need for a Savior. It is the gospel that shows you who the Savior is and what he has done. Paul's point here is that we can be saved only by the gospel, not by the law of Moses. The gospel is the message of Jesus and his power to save. Ultimately, people are saved by the sacrifice of Jesus that completely pays off their debt of sin. Ultimately, this is the reason behind our entrance into heaven, because our sin has been removed. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Okay? The gospel is the message that instructs us about Jesus' death and informs us how we receive the saving power of that sacrifice. How do we apply that sacrifice to us? Well, in a way, of course, we don't. God does. But we do in a personal way when or when the Holy Spirit causes us to accept it. Okay? It is the gospel message that must be believed in order for anyone to ultimately be saved. But in order to believe the gospel, People must hear and learn it. You can't, it's not just the word gospel, okay? It's what's in it, of course. And what's in it? Well, what's in it, again, is the Son of God becomes a human being. That human being lives a totally, completely perfect life and willingly gives his life up to death, gives his life up, dies. And that death, the suffering and death, we would say, pays the full, complete, and total, absolute penalty for every sin that's ever been committed by anybody who's ever lived or ever will live. Okay? That's the big picture, right? That's the big picture. And that's what Paul's talking about when he talks about the gospel. That's the thing that has to be believed. The believing does not cause the sins to be paid for. The sins are already paid for. The believing causes the person to know that truth for themselves and therefore take comfort from it, and therefore give God the worship and glory for saving him, and thus goes to heaven. Okay? It is not the believing that causes the sin to be removed. The sin is already removed. That is really important to know. It's really important to understand. And this is something that I think Christians very often get confused about. This is why I've said so many times how important it is to keep the little prepositions correct. By grace through faith. Not the other way around. The grace of God caused Jesus to sacrifice his perfect life on the cross. The grace of God caused God to then look upon the world as having no sin, because the sin has been taken away. But it is the faith that God says is essential. God says so. God says it's the faith that is essential for your entrance into heaven. Now, some may say, well, that contradicts each other. Again, I say, so what? Big deal. Both are true at the same time. We've had that so many times already. And that's true about the real presence. That's true about the two natures of Christ. That's true about the Trinity in threes. God is one, God is three. Both are true at the same time. Okay? We are saved by grace, we are saved by faith. Okay? All sins have been paid for, but not everybody goes to heaven. This is why I say it's problematic and makes only life more difficult to tell an unbeliever that they're forgiven. Now, again, in a technical sense, they are. That is, their sin has been paid for. Okay? But they don't think they're forgiven. Either A, they don't think they need to be forgiven, or B, they think they got to do something for the forgiveness. Okay? But have they been forgiven in the sense of, has their sin been removed? Yeah, it has. So, but I don't like to use that term. I don't like to tell an unbeliever their sins have been forgiven. I'd rather tell, okay, it's parsing words. Right, yes, I grant you. Yes, it is. It's parsing words. But as we know, words mean things, don't they? And it's one thing to tell somebody your sin has been paid for. You don't have to pay for it. And it's another thing to tell them you are forgiven by God. Forgiveness is kind of personal, It's kind of personal. It's kind of, it's me and the Lord, okay? And if you don't believe that Jesus has removed your sin, you're not going to feel forgiven in the first place. And so you're not a believer. This is a real problem, see? But I think this is where Christians, sometimes we want to simplify things, and so we say, Jesus paid for the sins of the whole world, but those people aren't forgiven, or in a way, in the sense, kind of like saying, their sin still clings to them or whatever. Okay? Well, yeah, Jesus said that once. That's true. He did. He said, well, you'll die in your sins, he told the Pharisees. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that they believe their sins still are there, and they have to take care of them themselves. That's what it means. Okay? I have to continue my sacrifices. I have to continue going to the temple or the synagogue, as the case may be. I have to continue, plastering Bible passages on my forehead or on my wrists. I have to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, fill in the blank, okay? That's what it means when he says you'll die in your sins. You're going to die believing that you still have to pay for your sins. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that their sin is still there. It's not. It can't be. If it was there, then why did Jesus say it's finished? It's done. And why does the Scriptures teach us that the sins of all people have been paid for? Why does the Scriptures teach universal redemption, universal atonement? If the sins are still connected, if we're still carrying our sins, if people are still carrying their sins into hell, literally, I mean truthfully, then Jesus didn't pay for their sins on the cross. It's as simple as that, folks. You can't have it both ways. You just can't. You can't have it both ways. You can have, yes, salvation by grace and salvation by faith. Yes, you can have that. But you cannot have Jesus paid for the sins of the whole world, and yet people go to hell for their sins. Huh? What? No, people go to hell because they're unbelievers. They don't go to hell because of their sins. You can't have it both ways. You just can't. The Scriptures are pretty clear on that. Okay? The whole world is redeemed. But not the whole world will go to heaven. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. Okay? There are many in the church today who try to use other means besides the gospel to appeal to people to come to Christ and his kingdom. Some churches offer fun and food and entertainment and excitement to attract people. Others appeal to the skill of the preacher, the beauty of the buildings, the impressive choir. Yet the Bible shows that the apostles and others converted the lost by preaching the gospel to them. They did not offer worldly promotions to get people to listen. They just told people about Jesus and his saving work. The greatest motivating power we have is the story of God's love, Jesus' death, and the eternal life we can have through him. If we trust the power of the gospel, we will not appeal to man's carnal, fleshly, physical desires. We save men by preaching Jesus' death, so their faith stands in God's power, not in man's wisdom. Those who reject the message will perish. Clearly, Jesus and his apostles refused to use physical appeals like many people use today. If Jesus used physical things, he would have worn flashy clothes, traveled around in a beautiful chariot pulled by gorgeous white horses, and all of his apostles be dressed like, whatever businessmen or whatever. And probably do more than just one or two feeding of 5,000s or so. Probably everywhere he went, he would just pass out free bread all the time. He didn't do that. He did it when it served his purpose, and that's it. The rest of the time, he was in his humiliation, in his humble state. Okay. We'll pick it up at verse 17 next time. Questions, comments, considerations, and such and so. All right, let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.